Welcome to How to Write a Paper 2 Effectively for Global Politics. I'm going to spend the next couple minutes explaining to you how to do a paper 2 and what all the elements that should be a part of it in order to get hopefully a higher grade. What's going to happen is whenever you guys first come into the exam on the date for the external assessments, you're going to be shocked. I'm not going to lie. You're going to see the exam, you're going to see the questions, and you might experience a little bit of I don't know what to call it, more like an academic shock. That's because the language of the question is going to sometimes be a little bit confusing, but if you watch the video on how to effectively break down questions, that would help you out. So please check out that video that I made a while ago. But I'm going to go through the actual process of what I would do if I was taking one of these exams. So the first thing you need to do, calm down. You might be shocked, but honestly, they're manageable questions. They're not that bad, and you can get through it. It's really not too bad. This was from the May 2017, sorry, not the May, but this is from the August 2017 exam. These are the actual questions. So notice there are 2 questions from each of the 4 core units of study: sovereignty and international relations, human rights, development, peace and conflict. There are a total of 8 questions in total. Now, you need to remember, HL students, you will answer 3 of these. SL students, you will answer 2. Okay? And that is the requirement. You have to do that. Okay. So the first thing you do, you open up the test, read through all the questions as quick as you can, and then it'll move us to the first strategy, which is elimination. Elimination is key, and you're going to do that within the first maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes of the exam. You need to automatically eliminate 1 unit of study if you're HL and 2 units of study if you are SL, because remember, SL students are answering 2 questions out of the 8, and HL students are answering 3 questions out of the 8, but they are not from the same unit of study. You cannot answer questions 1 and 2, or you cannot answer questions 3 and 4. It need to be from different units of study. So automatically cancel the questions that you find to be the most difficult and that you find to be the most challenging. So for here, I just randomly chose Unit 4. Let's say I was not strong in Unit 4 at all, so I decided not to even look at Unit 4. For this, I'm pretending that I'm an HL student, by the way. Okay, at this point, I'm going to look at the other remaining questions, and I know that I have to choose 3 more questions, 1 from each of the remaining units. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to eliminate the question that I don't feel confident enough answering for the remaining units. Let's say it is just these ones. What I have in the end are my 3 identified paper 2 topic questions that I'm going to write for the external assessments. SL students, you're going to cancel off 1 more. Let's just say you would cancel off this question number 4. Then you'd have question 5 and question 1 to write. Okay. So at this point, strategy number 2, focus. You've already eliminated and you've eliminated other questions. You're going to move into the focus area. So you're going to identify which question you're going to focus on first and only focus on that one for the first paper writing session. I chose probably one of the difficult ones that I have up here, the one that was identified to me by a student as being challenging. So let's go through this one and determine what we're actually going to write. So I chose question number 5. Definitions of development that stress meeting basic needs should be replaced with definitions that focus on well-being. Discuss this statement. Once again, shock. It seems a little, the question is a little out of the ordinary. It is very basic, and it causes you to kind of stress out a little bit. But if you use my strategies, hopefully it will make it manageable and you'll be able to get through this test. Strategy number 3, isolation of the arguments. So at this point you have your question, and a good thing to do at the very beginning is perhaps to identify major arguments that exist just from the main claim itself. You can call them binary relationships perhaps. Notice we're focused around the concept of development, which is a key concept, by the way. And just reading this question, I might identify, okay, there are 2 ends of the spectrum here. There is a binary relationship that exists. Basic needs and well-being, right? A replacement of this idea in relation to development. So right now I'm breaking down the question itself. And I'm asking myself, I'm just reflecting personally, like, what does basic needs mean? What does it mean to well-being? What does that even mean? And at this point, perhaps I remember back in the course that we studied Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in this sense, basic needs, what are basic needs? Those are physiological needs: food, water, shelter. And then I asked myself, okay, basic needs. What do basic needs really need to be fulfilled in order to achieve them? And in my mind, money, which focused in on the concept of economic development, because remember, we're focused on development. So I have that idea. But then I needed to question myself on saying, well, what is well-being specifically, and how does that relate to development? And for me, I was thinking more of the higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which are perhaps self-actualization, reaching your highest and fullest potential, the idea of perceived well-being, or happiness. So what this helps me understand is the question's asking is that the definition of development needs to move away from the idea of basic needs or economic development and shift more towards focused on well-being or perceived happiness or movement towards self-actualization. Now, please understand that this is my own interpretation of the question. You might have a completely different understanding of what they're asking, and that's fine as long as you write an effective essay. It's fine. So at this point, I have my ideas, I have my binaries, my arguments that I could essentially have as my base. So I moved to strategy number 4, which is the development of content points. Okay, so I've broken down the question, and I need to determine what areas of global politics did I study that I can use to answer this question effectively. So at this point, my suggestion, keep in mind your argument, your major points, your main claim, and then perform a memory dump. I'm going back and I'm thinking about the hierarchy of needs. I'm thinking about economic development. I'm thinking about, wellness and happiness. And then I start remembering, okay, basic needs. What did we talk about? The hierarchy of needs, physiological needs. We talked about poverty. I know we talked about poverty in class. Development, economic development. So I can connect to the concept of absolute poverty, and if I do that, I can connect to the idea of relative poverty, meeting the basic needs of a society, perhaps. So I'm starting to develop this line of logic that I can use to develop arguments. And you can actually, on the test, write down on the question section, like ideas. At this point, I'm still kind of connecting to, indicators of development because it's definitions of development. So I'm thinking, okay, well, what else did we study? We studied the HDI, Human Development Index. And at this point, I'm starting to think, okay, well, wealth, that's basic, meeting basic needs, health, kind of basic needs, education as well. But at the same time, I'm starting to move a little bit more towards that well-being idea. So I'm starting to develop this kind of like argument that could perhaps be one of those crossover points, which is awesome because now I have, a different perspective in my discussion. So then I started thinking more, okay, what else did we study? We looked at the Happy Planet Index, and that's a perfect example of an indicator that is a push for the well-being idea. So I might talk about HPI at this point. And then like floodgates just started opening. I was starting to think about global politics even more. And then I said, okay, well, what in society today, how do we determine that we're moving towards well-being? What is society going to look like if we're a well-being society? And then I started remembering that we were talking about how we can develop society and citizens, and then it started to spark in my mind, the approaches for developing the economy. We talked about a knowledge economy, and that could be a demonstration of how we're working towards well-being in citizens because we're working towards a knowledge economy. Then in my mind I said, oh yeah, we also talked about a circular economy, and that could work as well. Benefits of society, well-being of the system. So now I've gotten all of these content areas that I've focused on, and everything is just falling out. And I'm making these points, and I'm just keeping tabs on what arguments I can potentially make for this discussion. This hopefully is all within the first 5 to 10 minutes of the exam, because you have a limited amount of time. But just know that you have the knowledge and just have faith that you can do this. So at this point, I've identified, content areas. Maybe I should, if I have time, identify key concepts. There's development definitely here. There's concept of equality I can talk about. I can talk about justice. All these things are related to the topic. I'm trying to think about potential theory I can use in my discussion, and I'm just sitting here trying to think about the developmental theory, because this unit 3, it's about development. What theory do we look at? And I'm just thinking, well, we talked about dependency theory, neo-Marxism, neo-colonialism, neoliberalism, modernization. And I'm sitting here and I'm just racking my brain thinking, well, basic needs towards well-being, which one of these theories might work? Which one can I use as a discussion point? And then it just kind of hit me, neo-Marxism. And the question is why? How does that even make a connection? Well, if neo-Marxism, I'm thinking about underprivileged third world states that aren't having their basic needs met. Oh, basic needs, uh-oh. And then, would a neo-Marxist see that the well-being of society would be an indicator of development, right? We've pushed past this kind of system that is oppressing the minority states, and we're moving towards this self-actualization of the third world. So then I had this amazing epiphany where it was like, oh, neo-Marxism might be that great connection point to really be a whole different discussion argument. So I threw that in and I said, now I have all of these things. I've got key concepts, I've got content, I've got theory that I can talk about, and all I need to do is write the paper now. So, what content areas can we cover in these responses? And this is just from brainstorming. I came up with the idea that basic needs and the relationship that this indicator has to the concept of poverty and economic development. I can talk about that. I'm focusing on the idea of basic needs. So I'm kind of laying the groundwork of the first argument that no, basic needs is important. So we're going to focus on economic development and poverty. Second point that I might make is how there's a mix of perspectives when it comes to determining development. The HDI with the health, wealth, education, I can talk about that. And I can also talk about the movement towards well-being as being pushed for as a movement towards the knowledge economy and circular economy. That could be another discussion point. And then finally, that theory tie-in that was amazing. I can talk about neo-Marxist interpretations and how it could be a point at which these ideas are coming together. And the question is, do I have multiple perspectives to the major argument? I believe I do, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But at this point, you need to develop a quick structure. You need to quickly develop the structure of your paper, and that's pretty easy. So what I did was I took all those argument points and I just threw them over here. You have your introduction for sure and a conclusion, but then you need body paragraphs to kind of work on. And I'm going to use these basic elements, these arguments, to develop how my paper is going to look. And at this point, I'm going to say, well, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the idea that basic needs are important and there should not be a shift in this idea. That's point number one, because that's the base, right? And then rather than moving on to the mix, I'm actually going to move towards the counter argument, the counterpoint, which would be that there needs to be a shift. And I'm going to say that the movement towards well-being is being pushed by the development of knowledge economy and circular economy. And then I'm going to move towards this mixture perspective, and I think the HDI might be a good point to move into next. So I'm going to have that as my third point. And then my final point, which I think is a really strong one because it's really theoretical and can kind of tie things together, is going to be that neo-Marxist interpretation. And then I'll just have my conclusion, then I'll be done. So essentially, this is what my paper is going to look like, my first paper to topic. At this point, you have your knowledge, you have your abilities. Hopefully that has been within the first 10 minutes of the exam. And now I'm creating the introduction. I'm actually going to start writing the paper. And I just wrote this really quick introduction. It might not be the best intro in the world, but this would be kind of a basic idea of what would be for a good intro. I know a lot of you have been struggling with the development of an introduction for this type of test. And I think if you just follow a couple key elements, you'll come up with a pretty solid intro. And I identified what makes a good introduction: identification of terminology, connection to the demands of the question, reflecting on the command term that's there, and it just key ideas being pointed out. So if I'm going through this, I'm just going to kind of click on whenever I'm reaching one of these elements. So I'm going to read it to you. In contemporary global politics, development is a term that is widely used to demonstrate state growth. The basic definition for development focuses around the idea of growth and improvement. Boom. Identification of terminology. Unfortunately, development is an extremely contested term having different meanings in different situations. Typically, whenever analysts refer to development, they are focused on meeting the basic needs of a society, yet there has been much discussion on whether it is better to view development in terms or if we should shift our understanding towards well-being. Sorry, I kind of skipped, but the connection to the demands of the question is kind of here. because we're focusing on the basic needs and well-being, right? Because that's in the question itself, so I'm connecting to the question. This primary claim can impact how development will be defined in the 21st century. I apologize. A few of the major reasons why this shift is being discussed can be attributed to the revised understandings of what the basic needs mean to society, the push for the creation of knowledge economies, and the adoption of a circular economy. Even though there are many reasons why contemporary understandings of development should shift towards well-being, there are also many who do not see this as necessary. To better review the claim, there needs to be a focus on all of these discussion points. So I have reflecting on the command term, discussion. I have key ideas pointed out. So I have my introduction. This is my terminology. This is my connection to the question. I am making sure that the key ideas are being pointed out that I'm going to discuss. And then I get into it, my first argument, my first point. My strong suggestion, strategy number 7, that you use the PEAL method, P-E-A-L, point, evidence, analyze, link method when writing a paragraph. I did this for you guys. I wrote a paragraph and I attempted to identify where the PEAL method focused in on and why it's kind of a good method to use. So I chose that last point, the neo-Marxist perspective, because I thought it was really challenging. So I wanted to write it out for you and identify how I would use the PEAL method to effectively write a paragraph in a paper 2. And I will go through and I will identify once again. So at this point, I've already written 3 paragraphs, one, kind of for basic rights, another one for well-being, and one with the Human Development Index, kind of as a point where things are starting to come together. And now I'm getting into that more theoretical perspective. And I'll read this to you while we go. Although there has been evidence for contemporary push towards a more well-being perspective of development, the theory of neo-Marxism would argue that well-being and basic needs need to both remain in the forefront of development. Point. That's my point. So, P and PEAL made my first point. You need to make that clear, what you're going to talk about in this paragraph. So, the next. Neo-Marxism focuses on the idea that the core states of the world, USA, European states, Australia, Canada, etc., disadvantage peripheral states, third world countries, in order to maintain some form of hegemony or political and economic control. That's a clarification of what neo-Marxism is, so that's kind of a definition. Next is my evidence. The United States put heavy emphasis on economic power as an indicator of strength and development, which can be demonstrated by President Trump's insistence that the world renegotiate trade deals with the U.S. The neo-Marxist perspective allows us to view the world in an us against them perspective, which focuses on the rich northern states taking advantage of the poor South. The neo-Marxist pushes for import substitution as a primary means to generate more independence from the guise of neocolonialism. That's my evidence. So I'm talking about an actual case study, somewhat of a case study of the United States, Trump, their insistence on renegotiation, and how a neo-Marxist would actually push for the import substitution model as a way to kind of get out from neocolonialism. So that's my evidence. Now I'm going to move towards an analysis of these points. So here's my argument, I clarified, and I've given you evidence. Now I'm going to analyze it here so it makes sense. The independence of states through this method would certainly generate revenue, which would meet the basic needs aspect of development. Yet there is also a well-being concept tied to this practice. With less dependence on hegemonic states, the peripheral, third world states would be able to invest in education, infrastructure, and health, which would elevate the well-being of society. So I've analyzed, I've used my knowledge, I've given my example, and now I've kind of reflected and kind of tied all of these things together through an analysis. Now the last thing I want to do is link it back to the main claim of the argument. Through the neo-Marxist perspective, we can see that there needs to be a relationship developed between the basic needs and well-being argument of development rather than a black and white identification the original claim sets out to identify. That would be the link. I've just simply tied my argument, my ideas here, back to the main claim, the main question, whether it should be basic needs or well-being, should be revised. No, I'm telling you no, and it's going against this original claim. So P-E-A-L. As you can see, I have consistency, I have an idea, I've explained it, I've given evidence, and I've linked it. And that makes for an effective paragraph in a paper 2. So at this point, I've written multiple paragraphs, and now I need to identify and make sure that I have a counterargument or multiple perspectives. And my question is, going back to my identified points, are there multiple perspectives? For this discussion, heck yeah. I've got 3 primary perspectives. Number 1, basic needs only. Number 2, well-being only. Number 3, mixture of ideas, and I have 2 paragraphs on that, but they're 2 different arguments. So I have different discussion points here. And once I've written these, I'm going to move on to my conclusion. Strategy number 9, conclusion. So what makes a good conclusion? There should be absolutely no new arguments or concepts introduced into the conclusion. If you're running out of time, conclusion is the least of your worries, so a very quick wrap-up. It doesn't need to be this comprehensive. You need to make sure that you get through all of the questions. So once again, I stress, if you are running out of time, this should be conclusion. If you're running out of time, briefest conclusion possible. That way you can get to your other questions. Okay? If you have enough time and you want to write an effective conclusion, here's what you should do. So, no new arguments or concepts introduced. You should connect to the domains of the question again and remind of the key ideas. So here's my conclusion. Having discussed the various perspectives when it comes to the revision of the concept of development from the basic needs concept to a more well-being, we can further emphasize that development is a deeply contested term. The idea is that economic indicators require the basic needs to be the focus of development, the push for the creation of knowledge economies, the adaptation of a circular economy, and how there perhaps needs to be a mixture of these 2 perspectives all helps us to understand the argument more. In conclusion, development in the 21st century can both be discussed in terms of basic needs and well-being, and that the main argument shouldn't focus on the division, but the integration of ideas to help determine if true development has occurred. The end. There we go. And now I've finished my first paper 2 essay. If you are doing it effectively in the time frame, you will have enough time to maybe do a quick reread to go back through, identify just quickly if you need to make a cross off a word or something, or add an apostrophe or what have you. But you shouldn't have any huge cross offs, scratch offs, circles, arrows pointing to a whole nother section. You should not do that. If you've effectively planned and brainstormed this thing, it should easily come through the writing process. At this point, you've written 1, strategy 11. If you have time, take a small break, small mental break. Close your eyes, sit back, stretch your hand, stretch a little bit, because you have, as HL, 2 more to do. If you're in SL, you've got 1 more to do. So strategy number 12, once you're ready, see strategy number 2. Start all over again. Strategy number 2 is the brainstorming, the focus, getting back into it, doing everything again. And then you come to this point again, you have another little break. If you're HL, strategy 13, see strategy number 2 again. Do it all over again for the 3rd one. Once you finish, strategy 14, be proud of your accomplishments. Don't be sad. Be proud that you've gotten through a tremendously difficult exam. Honestly, to have taken global politics, to gain this level of knowledge, to get to this point, you should be really proud of yourself and what you've done. So once you leave the exam, don't be sad. Be happy, be proud of the effort you put in. Don't question yourself. You can go talk to your teacher and just wait for your results to come back. If you've done everything necessary, you should be fine. And I just attached this as well, the guidelines. This is going to change, obviously, if you have different time frames. If this test starts, for us, it starts at 8:30 to 10:15 for SL, 8:30 to 11:15 for HL. This is how I'm going to break it down, and I'll post this on Schoology for you. But the time breakdown, typically this is what you're going to do, about 10 minutes. 10 minutes to break down the question, brainstorm arguments, consider the structure of the response, just like I did strategies 1 through whatever it was before you start writing. About 10 minutes. And then you've got about around 30 or so good minutes to really develop your main idea, your arguments, and to write your support paragraphs. If you brainstorm effectively, this should come. It should not take you that long. I think a good half hour, 40 minutes is more than enough time. And I put 10 minutes right at the end. If you haven't done a counterclaim or a conclusion, you should probably around 9:10 really start making sure that you're closing up your first paper 2 essay. Read, finalize, what have you. So this is about 40 minutes right here of actual writing, and you should be done by 9:20. 9:20 to 9:25 gives you a mental break, rest your hand, choose the next question while you're stretching your hand. So don't sit there doing nothing. I would actually make sure you're kind of maybe brainstorming a little bit while you're getting prepared. So at this point, this clock's a little off, should be 9:25. At 9:25, you should start your next exam, your next essay. Same deal. Break down the question, brainstorm, consider your structure, and then you have about 40 good minutes here. Develop your arguments, writing your paper, and then at 10:05 to 10:15, if you haven't done a counterclaim yet, you should start one. Work on your conclusion as well. At 10:15, this is the time the exam officially ends for SL students. So you need to have written 2 paper 2 topic essays, okay? And then you're done. If you're HL, you're still going strong. 10:15, sorry, this clock's wrong. 10:15 to 10:20, about 5-minute mental break, rest hand, choose the next question, stretch your hands. So this is wrong right here, I'm sorry. At 10:20 to 10:30, same deal, 10-minute breakdown question, identify all these things, brainstorm your arguments, what's the claim, what's your supporting argument, consider the structure, what's the order, and then you've got about 45 minutes actually for this last one to really go through and get it done, because this most likely is going to be the hardest one for you. 10:30 to 11:05, develop argument, support paragraphs. At 11:05 to 11:15, which is the end of the exam, make sure that you get a counterclaim or argument and finish. 11:15, you're done. Cannot go any longer. So you need to, as an HL student, make sure that you have 1, 2, 3 done correctly within that time frame. And that's the end of this presentation. If you have any questions, please come see me, send me an email, what have you. Hopefully this helps you out in knowing how to effectively write a paper 2. Use sample questions to do what I just did. And then if you practice and practice, you'll get faster at it, and it'll be a little bit easier for you on test day. So good luck, and I will see you when I see you.